I look at Bitcoin as a long-term play, and if you look at it long-term, you look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin. It's something that you know what the supply of it's going to be going into the future. You know that it's not like, unlike US dollars or any other currency, it's not something that can be printed. It's not something that can be manipulated. So for those reasons, I hold Bitcoin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I am Kenneth Amaduri, and yes, it is time for some more digital currency talk. We do a lot of that here, and we're following this trend. It's a very hot trend, and who better to talk to than the writer and director of Magic Money, The Bitcoin Revolution. Chances are you've seen this documentary. His name is Tim Delmastro. He's also the director of End of the Road, How Money Became Worthless. So without any further ado, Tim, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kenneth. Thanks so much for having me on. I've been a fan of yours for a little while now, and you do some great work over there. I love listening to your interviews, so thanks again for having me on.
Well, you're kind for saying that. Tim, I want to ask you about Magic Money and what inspired you to produce this documentary? Yeah,
so there's quite a few other Bitcoin-related documentaries already on the market. Some of them are a few years old. But I felt that there wasn't any documentary that actually explained Bitcoin and its usability. And what I mean by that is that I would watch these other documentaries and I would still be confused about how to use it and what it actually is. So in Magic Money, it's a documentary that is very demonstrative. So you'll be able to, if you watch the film, you'll be able to see exactly how it works. We discuss what private and public keys are. We discuss, cold wallets, all that kind of thing. It is a very beginner type documentary. It's not something that goes into detail with, the scaling debate or anything like that. It's a documentary that I hope that my mother can watch and then get a grasp of Bitcoin. So that's why I made the film, so that people that are outside the Bitcoin community can perhaps try Bitcoin for the first time, start to use it, and start to reap the benefits of it.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you say it that way, and talking about your mother and understanding it, because I think about people like that too, maybe baby boomers or people who are just not tech savvy. They see Bitcoin and they're confused already, and we have a lot of arguments right now, and the block size debate and the hard fork and the direction in which Bitcoin is going. And I just want to get your pulse for where we are with Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is at right now, and does it concern you? Do you believe Bitcoin will be resilient in pushing forward and getting through the problems that it's dealing with currently?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned just before, the scaling debate isn't something that's really brought up in the film, but after the film interviews many prominent people, experts within the Bitcoin community, and after I'd finished the interviews, I would actually just ask these experts about what their thoughts were on the scaling debate. My personal opinion is that I think we will get through this. It's just another thing, right? Like if you look at Bitcoin's history, you'll see that there were other sort of what would you call it, obstacles in the past, and they just get resolved. The free market will resolve it. You recently had the whole issue with the ETF not being approved, and leading up to that, there was a lot of hype and media attention that was brought to Bitcoin. I personally think it is something that we'll look back on maybe 5 years from now, and it'll just be a blip, and it'll just sort itself out. I think the free market will just sort itself out.
Sure. And do you have any opinions as to what you think might happen? Are we going to have a Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Unlimited, two different currencies for Bitcoin. Do you think that's a potential here? Is that the free market answer?
Well, I'm not a Bitcoin expert, but from the experts I've spoken to and interviewed, I think the general consensus was that the likelihood of Bitcoin splitting into two is very unlikely. Everyone agrees that it would be disastrous. Yeah, I think in the end, I think it's all a bit of hype, and it won't be as I don't think the likelihood of it happening is very high.
Sure. Well, I'd like to ask you your thoughts on Bitcoin and the price. It had dropped under 1,000 with the ETF news, and some of the problems that we're seeing. It's kind of been a little volatile, although it's bounced back. Last I checked, it was over $1,100, and it's showing itself to be very resilient. Now, in general, would you say Bitcoin is going higher, meaning that it's still undervalued, or are you hesitant to pull the trigger at these current prices?
Well, there's a few ways to look at that. I think I look at Bitcoin as a long-term play, and if you look at it long-term, you look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin. It's something that you know what the supply of it's going to be going into the future. You know that it's not like, unlike US dollars or any other currency, it's not something that can be printed. It's not something that can be manipulated. So for those reasons, I hold Bitcoin. But what the price is going to be tomorrow, I don't know. You mentioned volatility just a while ago. It has been volatile, but if you look at the history of Bitcoin, the volatility is actually getting smaller. If you look back, 2-3 years ago, the volatility was much greater than it is now. And I think that's just because the market is getting bigger, the market cap's getting bigger, it's becoming more stable. So I think as we go on into the future, the volatility will get even smaller still. But I do expect Bitcoin to be a lot higher a few years from now.
Tim, when it comes to money, I mean, you did a documentary on this, money going worthless. Do you think this is going to be a reason why Bitcoin gains a lot of traction? Is it going to be, Western countries, countries in Europe, the US, dealing with currency problems that cause people to go into Bitcoin into large degrees? I know we've seen that, with Cyprus and Argentina and China, in these countries where they're dealing with, different currency issues. And people are resorting to Bitcoin, and the price has been reflecting that because Bitcoin serves a big purpose. It's a big solution for people that are in countries dealing with currency issues. And I'm wondering if that's what it's going to take for Bitcoin to continue to go to these price targets that some people have out there, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, and even more than that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think that any sort of currency crisis would be beneficial for the price of Bitcoin. But in order for that to happen, people have to first, en masse, understand what Bitcoin is. At the moment, I imagine if there was a currency crisis, gold and silver, precious metals would probably still be the beneficiary of any sort of currency crisis, just because Bitcoin is still very foreign to a lot of people. And so that was the purpose of making this film. It was so that people that are outside the Bitcoin community could get a better understanding of what Bitcoin is and how it works.
Yeah, it's interesting. But at the same time, I would almost wonder if it doesn't take as much to move Bitcoin than it would be for gold and silver. And if you believe in the manipulation, there's a lot in the way for gold to go to 5,000, 10,000, unless there's some implosion on the COMEX and some delivery issues. But Bitcoin, it's traded a lot more freely, and just the smallest move of capital into Bitcoin could really send it soaring here. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent here, but it's interesting that you mentioned manipulation of the precious metals markets. That's something that I've been following for years. My previous film, End of the Road, How Money Became Worthless, actually touched on the manipulation. But yeah, you're right. Bitcoin is not as manipulated. In fact, I don't think it can be manipulated to the degree that precious metals are. But at the same time, there's trust issues with anything that's digital, anything that's electronic, particularly for the older generation. So, yeah, I think that in the future, Bitcoin will be the go-to for any currency crisis, but I just don't, as my own personal opinion, I don't see that as being the case at the moment. I still think that precious metals would win out in a currency crisis situation. But yeah, it's just a learning curve, and I think as more and more people understand what Bitcoin is, how it works, how easy it is to move value out of a country, then yeah, Bitcoin will eventually be the go-to for any sort of currency crisis or any sort of political crisis that we may see in the future.
And so I'd like to get your thoughts on the role of some of these alternative currencies, these altcoins, digital currencies, such as Ethereum, Dash, Litecoin. Litecoin has had quite the move over the last few weeks here. Same thing with some of these other ones. Some are correcting. But are these competitors to Bitcoin? I know you were saying that Bitcoin is likely going to be resilient through these problems. And does that mean that these other ones are still going to just be essentially background noise to the gold standard in the digital currency community, Bitcoin?
Yeah, the crypto space is really fascinating, isn't it? I tend to think that most of the cryptos are just junk. I'm not a huge student of most of these cryptos. I am a follower of Tone Vays, who appears in my film, and look, he has a podcast called Crypto Scam, where he analyzes each of these cryptos. And you know what? Some of them have interesting qualities about them. A lot of them kind of seem scammy to me. And I think anyone that's looking at investing or anything in cryptos, they've got to really study them and understand how they came about and what they actually stand for. I think you'll find that most of them are just garbage. And yeah, I mean, why would you? The way I look at it is, yeah, look, Bitcoin is top dog right now. It's got the best developers working on it. It's the most most understood. It's the most widely known. So yeah, it is the gold standard as far as digital currencies are concerned. So why not just stick with Bitcoin? That's the way I look at it. You can dabble in other currencies if you want, but you mentioned volatility earlier. I mean, the volatility in some of these other altcoins is so much greater than Bitcoin that unless you really know what you're holding and why you hold it, you're probably likely to lose money.
Some great thoughts right there. Tim, if people want to learn about your video, actually watch your video, where would they go? And if you would, I mean, provide us with some closing thoughts here in general for people who might be interested in getting into Bitcoin or scared of it. Where do you think this is headed? And just some closing thoughts here.
Sure. So my film can be watched through the official website. It's magicmoneyfilm.com. You'll find links to store pages on there. You can watch it directly through the site. You can watch it using Bitcoin, and it's also on iTunes, Amazon, and it's actually been released in Japanese as well. So there's a link there for any listeners that may want to watch it in Japanese. There's a link to a Japanese page where they can watch the film as well. And as far as closing thoughts about Bitcoin, yeah, for anyone that's kind of on the fence or looking at getting into Bitcoin, the easiest way to understand it, and the way that I came to understand it, was just to use it. I think in the same way that when you talk to someone about precious metals, it's easier if you actually hand someone a physical coin. Then they kind of understand the value of it. And similarly with Bitcoin, I think, look, if someone's interested in Bitcoin or want to know more about it, I think, look, just go and play with it. Just play around with it, use it. You know, you may lose some value in the process because you don't know what you're doing, but you know, I think that's the best way to study Bitcoin, is to actually use it, move money from one wallet to another, move money, you know, with your friends, see how it works, and then you'll understand the power of it.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point right there. You know, it always costs something to learn how to do it, right, to execute, but nothing's more effective than actually some firsthand experience. Even people that want to buy precious metals for the first time, I tell them, go to your local coin shop, ask them what they have there, purchase some precious metals, take it to another coin dealer, sell it, and see what that process is like, or at least ask what's your buyback price, and just get a feel for the market. And it kind of demystifies it. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. You got to download your wallet, put some money in there, pay for something with it, and experience it. And I think once you do that, it kind of it makes you a little more fond of it, and you become a believer, especially once you start talking to experts who say, hey, you know, this is legitimate. This is a real solid currency that people can trust. So, Tim, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with me today, and I appreciate your analysis, and thank you for the work you've done to produce this these documentaries. If people want to learn more about them, we'll have the links in the description area. Again, Tim, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kenneth.